Wow, did everyone hear that? We are recording. So let me welcome you. And I want to first take care of business. I have to say this. The Poetry Society is supported by South Carolina Humanities, a not-for-profit organization inspiring, engaging, and enriching South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. I think we have a little bit of all those things tonight. This is the 684th meeting of the Poetry Society of South Carolina. It's our second meeting of the 2021-2022 season. And I would like to start with some urgent business. Our meetings are open to the public and free for anyone who wants to be here, but it does cost us money to do this. And our membership levels are shockingly low this year. So if you haven't renewed your membership yet and you can afford it, I urge you to go to our website and pay your dues. And we would really appreciate that. That's how we can keep going. We received some sad news this week. Many of you will remember Susan Myers, our past president, who died 4 years ago. Well, her husband, Blue Myers, passed away last weekend, and Blue was probably not a fan of poetry, but he was very supportive of Susan, and he was very generous to the Poetry Society after she died. And we will always remember that generosity and kindness. And so it is sad, and we are very honored for his largesse to us in those years. And if you're not receiving the newsletter and you want to, you don't have to be a member. Just send me a message with your email and I will get you on the mailing list. And we have so many great events, you will not want to miss them. Our fall contest submission period is opening on the 15th of this month, and it will close in November. It's at our website, poetrysocietysc.org. It should be updated soon with all the new details. We've got new contests this year and more money. We're giving away more money than we have in the past couple of years. So there's a lot of good prizes up for grabs this year. Let's see here. This weekend is a great weekend for poetry in the Low Country. Not only we have tonight, of course, the workshop tomorrow, but also tomorrow is Poetry at McLeod. It returns in person at McLeod Plantation with Grace Cassio. If you haven't seen her read, she does it all from memory. She's incredible. And she's also going to give a workshop on Sunday. So if you've been jonesing for in-person events, it's your chance to see other people and wear a mask and risk catching COVID. If you haven't already ordered your copy of the Poetry Society of South Carolina's History, I will show it to you. It's beautiful. I've got a few more of these hardcovers. I'm kind of running out though. So if you do want one, you can contact me and reserve one. You can always get the soft covers on Amazon.com by doing a little search for the history of the Poetry Society of South Carolina. And it'll be the first thing that pops up. Okay, I got all that out of the way. Now I want to introduce our opening act. Don't know what to call it. We need a better term. We've been saying opening poet, the warm-up poet, but Debbie Daniel is so special to the society. She goes way back. First time she read for the society was 27.5 years ago in 1994. She won the Society Prize in the year 2000, and since then she has won 28 or so contests, and I don't know how many countless honorable mentions. This year, she's sponsoring the Scotty Davis Watson Prize, so she's giving a little of that prize money back to the society. September 11th, 2009, she read with Lynn Thompson, and back when I was running Monday Night Poetry and Music, she appeared several times there too with her husband, Jack. You've probably read Debbie's bio in the newsletter on the website. Well, the biographical information provided on the program by the program committee is impressive, but it shows only one side of Debbie Daniel. In addition to the many publications listed in the bio, Debbie probably has hands full of poems that have not been published. I know she has a fascinating unpublished chapbook that's based on the experiences of her stepdaughter, Megan, written about Megan's years studying veterinary medicine. Debbie's two most recent books are novellas in flash, a form she may have invented. Her success in this form results in her spectacular voice. That voice is immediately recognizable, often hilarious, and definitely one of a kind. She has this crazy oddball sense of humor. Take, for instance, the title, Woman Commits Suicide in Dishwasher, or a poem's title, At Bridge Club, Eve Discusses the Trouble with Adam. Although that wild sense of humor is often present in her work, the work does not suffer from it. Debbie's respect for the power of description, her sensitivity to word choice, and her delight in taking on persona all make her work distinctive. Debbie is also modest. Her bio mentions she has published work in the PSSC yearbook. It's a very modest statement, to say the least. Since 2000, Debbie has won this 28 contests. Those poems appear. In some years, it almost looked like the yearbook was her chapbook. It had so many of her contests in it. She won, let's see, I already covered that. Debbie doesn't brag about prizes. I'd be surprised if she had any idea of the numbers. What Debbie does in spades is work. Ask her husband, Jack. He will tell you that she can spend an afternoon asking him to listen to yet another version of a poem or a piece of flash fiction, encouraging him to compare this version to the previous one with the question, does leaving out this one word make the piece better? Speaking of Debbie's husband, Jack McGregor, he is a musician, as is Debbie. Together they performed the Jack Daniel duo. For several summers, this duo performed for a nudist colony. I'd like to hear those stories. Some of Debbie's stories from those times are fabulously funny. In addition to being a very talented writer and singer, Debbie is also a visual artist, a woman for all seasons, a Renaissance woman. It is my great pleasure to introduce Debbie to you tonight.
That is quite an introduction. I would like for you to, on my tombstone, put all of that, or just the highlights would be fine. Thank you so much for inviting me to read. I'm thrilled to be part of anything that the Poetry Society does. It's been very good to me in the past and continues to be a main part of my poetic efforts, and is always a pleasure to be included in anything that happens here. So I'm going to read a few poems. Also, I'll do a quick shameless plug for the novella in flash Jim was mentioning. It's called A Family of Great Falls. Every story in it is under 1,000 words. Some of them I think you could consider to be prose poems. There's a very fine line between flash fiction and prose poetry. So sometimes a poem can take a different, a rebirth in a flash fiction form. So that is available through Ad Hoc Fiction in the UK, also on Amazon. So I'm going to start with a poem that was in this past Society's yearbook. It's called How We Make It Through. How we make it through. Notice the daffodils in the neighbor's yard. Comment on how they match his front door. Take the dogs on a walk, stopping at every corner, and when they sit without being told, reward them with special bacon-flavored treats. Watch old episodes of the Andy Griffith Show, the black and white ones with Barney Fife. During the hearings, the debates, the primaries, when sarcasm and lies and name-calling climb to a peak, when people bring up her emails again, even after 4 years, and when breaking news reports another mass shooting and another glacier melts into the ocean filled with plastic-choked fish, volunteer to be a docent at the museum, where you'll tour children through a gallery of impressionistic paintings, point out seasides and a host of sailboats and romantic picnics and rainy Paris afternoons. Talk about water lilies and sunflowers, and quote a sonnet you memorized when you were 17. Write a letter to an old teacher, not to your favorite, but to the no-nonsense one who made you work for an A. Write it. Even if you know she passed away years ago, fill it with details about what you learned. Write it in cursive on expensive stationery. And even if you don't mail it, stick a special forever stamp in the corner. Enclose an old yearbook photo so she can recognize your 17-year-old self. Plant some daffodils of your own so that next spring, someone walking by with a dog will take a moment to notice that something yellow and young is growing. So this next poem is called Things Lost. It's a bit of a list poem. Things lost. My spare key, my appetite for slasher movies, for pumpkin pie, for cursive letters, one glow-in-the-dark Halloween sock, earrings, too many to number, my waistline, my voice, willingly my virginity, a lifeline of dogs, Shady, Gypsy, Famous Amos, childhood chums, teenage crushes, neighbors moved away. Decades ago, my father, my mother, weary and worn down, and on one January morning, my nephew, only 18. I've misplaced reading glasses, recipes, resistance to desserts. I've lost muscle tone in my arms, hair down the shower drain, jackets, umbrellas left lonely on restaurant coat racks. In the flood, the certainty of home and my car totaled. Bit by bit, my friend is losing her husband. She searches after him, running her hands under cushions, shining a flashlight into the closet's dark, rummaging through the attic, even emptying the vacuum cleaner bag. She tells me that she knows he's still there somewhere, that if she keeps looking, doesn't give up, then she'll find him in one piece, right where she left him. The same lucky way I found my favorite pearl earring hooked in the fringe of my scarf. So I do a lot of persona poems. I guess it's because I like acting, so I like to take on the role of someone else. And this, the next couple of poems are about Adam and Eve, and maybe Jesus, maybe, in Joseph's room at the home for assisted living. His hands ache too much to carpenter a way through the wood of table or bench. Most days, he props his frame against the door, waiting for the promised angel. The shavings of his memory, manger, stable, water, wine, can no longer be planed into words. For fish or loaf, he holds no hunger. No matter the offered morsel, he denies the sip or swallow. The woman who washes his feet speaks in a tangle, telling tales of Joseph's son. She insists how, even now, that son is preparing a better place, a mansion. But does it appear? Night, Joseph kneed himself's palate, waiting for the return, the voice of a small boy for the one who called him father. At Bridge Club, Eve discusses the trouble with Adam. I haven't left him yet, she says, but it could be any millennium now. For all the good he is to me, he may as well be dead. She bites into a cucumber sandwich, tasting its coolness, remarks on the soft bread cut into little spades and hearts. Eve chews longer than necessary. She says, Bathsheba, first and second Sarah, nod, arrange their cards, nibble cashews and manna. Second Sarah pats Eve, says, hang in there, nothing's eternal. Eve loves Adam, sort of, but wishes he were more like Noah, always planning romantic cruises, or that poet David, who plays the psaltery. How cool to be married to a musician, to tour exotic cities like Jericho or Gomorrah. But Adam just sits and stares at the garden, waiting for something to grow, waiting for something to die. He sinks deeper into the lazy boy. First, Sarah suggests counseling, maybe some meds. Says she heard about a woman who hired Goliath to take out her husband. A woman like that might give herself stoned. Besides, I don't want Adam dead. I just want to live a little, explore my options. Ruth says, honey, it'll be a cold day in hell before women get any options. Here. For a while, no one speaks. The women look at Eve, takes another bite of her sandwich, holding everything on her tongue before she can find the will to swallow. I've got a couple more. This one, I like the visceral content of this and the reactions of the faces of the people who listen. Florida man dies after roach eating contest. It seemed foolproof. Just swallow and think exotic in Asia, pleasing to the palate. As for the crisp live ones, munch them quick, like pistachios or chips. It couldn't be simpler. The salivary secretions, the patient involuntary muscles of digestion would do the work to earn an easy win. Then the prize, an ivory python, would bring cash from the eager buyer waiting and watching in the cringing crowd. Boasting rights plus a roll of dough. Such joy from an afternoon snack. But then this. The mounting desperation of dozens of hairy legs clamoring to escape. The dark mouth, that damp yawning cavern, the turning into and away from the churn of a tongue with a life of its own. Oh, the crunch of thorax, the rasp of 1,000 little deaths against the back of throat, of pharynx, of ironic reflux tasted in the final throes. So this year, I turned 70, and I thought this last poem would be a nice one to end with. It still gives hope to those of us who are aging not happily. Swimming. The trellis slumps from the twining weight of trumpet vines, or the rotting of its wooden frame. Never mind the cause. We pause to lift, to prop it haphazardly against the brick hedge. All this to protect the neighbor from her wild-eyed discovery of our naked swimming. The neighbor, a placid widow behind plate glass windows, spends endless hours eyeing the island she created in the pond we share behind our houses. She has planted hibiscus, hot pink and saucy, heart-shaped elephant ear, and tall pussy willows so that indifferent box turtles could sun there and the lone blue heron could linger if lingering became its desire. The pond matters little to us, middle-aged, newly married, and kissing with tongue the simple, sweet-faced fact that we swim naked in our backyard pool, that we crave swimming naked, floating beyond wrinkles and layers of laid-upon years. The trellis will last through summer and into fall, while the water laps warm and ripe. How young it feels, licking along bare legs, bellies, the tanned skin of our backs as we hold breath, diving to touch bottom. Thank you all so much for listening, and thank you again, Poetry Society of South Carolina. I'm very proud to be a member.
It was lovely, lovely. All right, I believe it is my privilege to introduce our main poet for the evening. Mai Der Vang is the author of Yellow Rain from Graywolf Press 2021 and Afterland from Graywolf Press 2017. She's the winner of the 2016 Walt Whitman Award of the Academy of American Poets, longlisted for the 2017 National Book Award in Poetry, and a finalist for the 2018 Kate Tufts Discovery Award. The recipient of the Lannan Literary Fellowship, she served as a visiting writer at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her poetry has appeared in Poetry, Tin House, the American Poetry Review, and other journals and anthologies. Her essays have been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, espnW, and elsewhere. Mai Der also co-edited How Do I Begin? A Hmong American Literary Anthology with the Hmong American Writers Circle. A Kundiman Fellow, Mai Der has completed residencies at Civitella Ranieri and Hedgebrook. Born and raised in Fresno, California, she earned degrees from the University of California, Berkeley, and Columbia University. She teaches in the MFA Program in creative writing at Fresno State. And just a little word about the latest publication, Yellow Rain, from Poetry, which highly recommends the collection. With Yellow Rain, Vang scores onto the record the previously silenced experiences of Hmong, rupturing the erasures within Western accounts of history, all while holding the US government, media, and scientists accountable. It is revolutionary. So I will welcome our guest with just a few lines from one of her own poems, which says, "They offer no place for you, but here is a place to rest your evening bird song, alongside a river of windows, under a trellis of bells, to nourish in silk leaves and a harvest of wild pears." Welcome, Mai Der.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's so lovely to be here with all of you this evening, and just to have this chance to connect with the Poetry Society of South Carolina. To start, I just want to acknowledge the indigenous lands of the Yokuts and the Mono here in Fresno, California, where I live and work, and also where I wrote most of my book, Yellow Rain, and I pay my respects to the elders and ancestors, both past, present, and emerging. And I'm grateful to Danielle within the Poetry Society of South Carolina. Danielle's here, I think, and who invited me and reached out, and then all of you now being able to connect with you as well. It's fantastic to be able to do that. So thank you for this generous invitation. And then as a very quick reminder too, an offer of encouragement, I'll be doing a workshop tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern time. And for me, it's going to be 7 a.m. So that will be a lot of fun. You'll get to see maybe the sun rising through my window during the workshop. But the workshop will focus on the poetic leap and what it means to try and let go of control in a poem, which I know for some poets or some writers can be really scary. So if you're interested in learning more about how to take creative risk in your work, please sign up for the workshop, and that's happening tomorrow morning. So, you know, as Tamara pointed out regarding my book, Yellow Rain, you know, Yellow Rain is a topic that some people know about, and then other people know maybe just a little bit about it. And then there are a lot of people who actually have never even heard of Yellow Rain. So I do want to give just a tiny bit of context. And as I read poems this for all of you today, I'll continue to add that context as well. The book it sort of takes a very visual approach to the poems, and so I may screen share a couple of the poems as well. So thank you for granting me the screen share access so I can share those poems on the screen with all of you. So I am a daughter of Hmong refugees, and just a little bit about who Hmong people are. Hmong refugees, when they were fleeing Laos and they were escaping for their lives just after the US withdrew from Vietnam and Laos during the Secret War. Many Hmong refugees reported that there was this mysterious substance that would fall from airplanes and that would make them sick. And my parents themselves, they were also part of the exodus of refugees that were leaving Laos during this particular time when these reports were coming out about this mysterious substance. And many people died from this substance, whatever it happened to be, no one knew. And so when a lot of refugees arrived to the camps in Thailand, they told the doctors and the camp workers about this substance, and even the workers and the doctors had no idea what to make of whatever this yellow rain was. So the first poem that I'd like to read for all of you is a poem that speaks to the sense of loss and the sense of fallout, as to what's happened. And it's a poem that I think when I wrote it, I was trying to reckon with this history of not knowing whatever this thing was. Declassified. May the dead be ever evidenced. May their clandestine names bellow from the mouth of an August monsoon. May they coax the truth from every storm. Long ago, there lived a jungle whose only cloth was camouflage, and all those who came to it learned the burden of hiding. Long ago, we memorized the refrains of wild birds, stitched them underneath our evacuated skins. Then man, then soldier, then vividness of saffron and canary arriving as small showers, divulging its anatomy to the ecosystem. To keep the covert buried is not how this story bends. The insects have always known their lineage of pollen, and the children of insects know too. May this secret war, its author of poisons, its professor of counterfeit treaties, kidnapper of honeybees, each iota of its polluted doing, may it all burn and blister under its own nakedness. So, this next poem, that's a poem that appears early on in the book, and I'm gonna think about sort of how to read these poems tonight for all of you in a way that moves through the book too. And this next one continues in the thinking about whatever this yellow rain was. And for this book, I did a lot of research into the archives. I looked at declassified documents because the US conducted this massive investigation into what this substance was. And one of the documents I came across had this phrase in it, "Fewer Hmong are dying now than in the past." And it made us sound like we were animals, fewer animal, like fewer Hmong are dying, fewer birds are dying now. And so I took that phrase and I lifted it to create this next poem. So let me go ahead and screen share. This is one that I'd actually like to put on the screen for all of you. So I hope you all can see that. And as you can see in the poem, there's a part that's italicized, and any parts that are italicized are actually pulled from the documents that I looked at. Fewer Hmong are dying now than in the past. As though poaching has absconded, as in sufferers who thrive while in captivity, where has the earmarked dying gone? May be partly due to the greater experience of the Hmong in dealing with yellow rain. Evolving toward loss, you are in a constant mood of alter, pending by the hour to outlive the hypothesis versus you. Treated themselves with opium after each attack. Still, they speculated, clogging their brains with rival guesses. Maybe Hmong population had already been decimated by the high fatalities and refugee exodus caused by earlier attacks dating back at least to 1976. Do not stop to bury the slain. Suggest less lethal chemical agents or lower concentrations. Do not pause to census the ones extinct. Maybe Hmong survivors were not taking time to count victims. For what matters why you document? For whom does tracking give a means? Maybe surviving Hmong people remaining in Laos were more wary and quick to take cover. If you are to hide and flee in the wild, grow out a new existence in the name of conservation, if this means the loss of your statistic. Large force of Vietnamese after them that they had no chance to study the effect of the CW agent on the plants. Do not stop to archive the foliage. There is no time, no mind to make science from your running. So I want to just continue on and talk a little bit about the book itself and the work of around Yellow Rain. As time went on, more refugees began to bring up this Yellow Rain, and a lot of them actually referred to it as Kemi. And because there was this sort of more accounts and more cases coming up around this mysterious substance, the US government began to take interest, and they conducted what would become a very confusing 8-year investigation into Yellow Rain. And it wasn't just the US government, but there were governments around the world that also began to take an interest. And the big question really was, if this was a biological weapon, then who was the perpetrator? And so you have to keep in mind that all of this was happening during the Cold War, when the US was at odds with the Soviet Union. There were also certain treaties in place that prevented the use of these kinds of weapons, such as the toxins and the biological weapons. So the point of the US investigation was to figure out who was to blame. And in the case of the US, the finger was pointed at the Soviet Union, who they accused as providing this Yellow Rain to the communists in Southeast Asia to then use against the Hmong people. One of the key major components of the US investigation were the thousands of blood samples that were sent and provided by refugees. And they also included vegetation samples. So Hmong refugees would go out and collect leaves and pieces of twig and even give up their blood from their own body to figure out what this was. And what's really sad is that they gave these samples with the hope of being able to try to figure out what Yellow Rain was. And it was almost futile, because by the time you sent these samples, to other laboratories in the United States, the samples had already degraded by the time they arrived. There were also problems with packaging, and in those days, you couldn't get a package soon enough to where it needed to go. So a lot of things got lost in transit, cracked vials. And this was actually something I learned when I was doing my research. I came across a dissertation by Dr. Rebecca Katz, who made the argument that it's very likely that some kind of toxin was used against the Hmong people. So all of that to sort of prepare you for my next poem. And this is a poem that explores the giving of these blood samples. And it also sort of explores the ludicrousness of how these samples were improperly routed. And how they got lost in transit. And so the poem actually begins with a very long epigraph, which I will read to give you a sense of how these samples were transported. Arriving as lost. It will be unaccompanied from Frankfurt to New York. Bangkok Courier Service indicates that no one has contacted at the State Department in Washington. Courier Service indicates that it is imperative someone be in New York when Lufthansa Flight 404 arrives on 22 August at 15:55, and that they have a ramp pass. Samples are being transported in the loose baggage hold where live animals travel. Courier Service is concerned that unless this box is collected as soon after the aircraft lands as possible, it will go to the Port Authority, and it will take a great deal of time to extricate it from this bureaucracy. And this was a cable from the US Defense Attaché Office in Bangkok to the US Army Medical Intelligence and Information Agency. There's no defense for how they will fail you, how you will become trapped in movement among the turmoil of belongings. There's no reason for how no one will be there to meet you, hold you onward, call you from the factory of your crossing. There's no acceptance for why you've been crammed alongside pets, placed haphazard to fend among the crates. No belief for no one taking you over continents, no explaining why you could result in a port, no mercy as to why no one has been told. There will be zero persistence to confess into proof, not a sliver behind to retrieve, but a box of broken vials they never meant to find, taken as the ransom for a mislaid answer they never meant to receive. So there were many instances of that kind of stuff happening, and there's a whole piece in this collection too where I extract a lot of the language from the documents about all of the vials being cracked and things getting misplaced in the packaging. So moving on here, the investigation continued, and there was actually a scientist who had discovered suspicious levels of trichothecene mycotoxin on one of the leaves. And from that, the US government began to build their case. And in many ways, the government wanted to be able to argue that yellow rain was a weapon and that the Soviet Union was culpable. And an argument like that would have been a huge blessing to the government because, if for anyone who was favoring increased arms development, they could then leverage the Hmong story and exploit that to push Congress for more defense spending. So it was very political, right? On the flip side, though, there were other people too in the country, particularly within the scientific community, who had a very different agenda. And their agenda, they were led by a professor at Harvard named Dr. Matthew Meselson, and they were more focused on preventing the proliferation of weapons in the world. And so they were very much at odds with those in government who wanted to leverage the Hmong story to make a case for more defense spending. And so what Dr. Meselson did was that he proposed that this substance, yellow rain, wasn't actually a weapon. He said it was just the fecal matter of bees defecating in large swarms. In other words, he said it was bee poop, that Hmong people didn't know any better, that, this substance was just bee poop. And so the concern was that if it really was a weapon, it could theoretically escalate political tensions around the world. So in order to prevent that conflict, it would just felt more convenient to say it was bee poop and that Hmong people had lied, even if Hmong people were really dying from it. And that's sort of my thinking. That's sort of my approach. That's what I discovered through my research. And, meanwhile, you had these two sides bickering in politics, and stuck in the middle were the Hmong people. And it's almost as if in the end, no one really cared what would happen to the Hmong people. So this next poem I want to read for all of you is actually a poem where the speaker seeks alliance with the bees because the speaker knows that the bees are innocent. And this one also starts with an epigraph. Allied with the bees. These people have been living in these areas for all their life, but they have never heard or experienced something like this before. Bees and honey are part of their life. They and their ancestors have traded honey for salt, clothes, and other goods for hundreds of years. And this was a letter to the editor written by S. Yang in Long Beach, April 6, 1984. Tell them, child, we have hiked these hills without shoes long enough to hunt alongside the bees, memorizing the bend, pulse of their voices when they go dream inside the trees. We have been crowned with syrup of their toils so that our syntax might awaken to know its full range. Compassed to the north, pristine as a nomadic butterfly. Tell them, daughter. We watched as they buried their queen, folding her into cashmere of her wings before swarming the body toward a fire of stars. And for days, the forest keened a shadow lullaby. And for nights, we listened for the bees only to uncover the hurried hush of our own stranded feet falling forgotten as collateral beings. Tell them, Mintai, we are not misled in our anguish. What happened to the bees also happened to us. Okay, so I have a couple more poems I want to share before I close up here. When I was doing so much of this research, like for me growing up, like these were not things that my parents ever told me about, and so I discovered a lot of this stuff through my own research, my own investigation, my own sense of inquiry, my own curiosity, right? I think sometimes my parents, they still are like baffled at what I do when I try to explain to them I'm a poet, because poetry is such a new concept. Poetry, like the written poetry, is still a new concept to so many Hmong people. Although poetry, the sung form of poetry is something that Hmong people have been doing for centuries. And so for them, it's like, what are you doing with, you're writing a book, your poems, and the first time I showed my mom my book of poetry, she said, it's so thin. Is this really a book? And I said, yes, Mom, this is how thin they can be, but there's a lot of poems in there. So for me, like that's sort of been the journey I've taken with this work. And the next poem I want to share is a poem where, when I here in California, in the Pacific Northwest, we're lucky to live amongst the giant redwood trees, and the sequoias as well. Although recently we've been dealing with wildfires and very bad air quality here in California. But this is a poem that I wrote when I was trying to think through yellow rain, and it was a way to sort of consult the redwood trees about what yellow rain might be. And so I'll read that for all of you today. Prayer to the redwood. Senescent and dwelling in your tower with sorrel for shoes, I come to you fleshed with intention, a muted engine dismantled at your coastal throne, in doubt and bearing intuit from you. Tell me if you've heard of the Apis dorsata, and I will affirm what I know of its innocence. Take this confession to your wildlife, mahogany limbs grasping the upper avenues of your genius memory, as readily there a nursery for hemlock and new firs. How would you have guarded your pine? These sudden flecks, you would have known its taste as factory born, far from organic consent. You would have deemed its false footprint. Here in your globe's echo, you exhale the words, stockpile, degrade human subjects. I make sentient my palm over your bark of suede, dense as it were to defy a passing inferno. Stockpile, degrade, human subjects. No secret must ever be singed of your knowing. So I have one more poem I'd like to read for all of you. And actually I'm gonna pull this one from my first book, Afterland, and I'll close with this one. And this is a poem that I wrote for my grandfather, who was a refugee and who came to this country. And then my family buried him in the mountains near our city here. And there's a thing that Hmong people have about wanting to be buried in a way that is geographically situated near mountains and foothills. Your mountain lies down with you. Mourn the poppies, the mangosteen and dragon fruit, but you come as a refugee, an exile, a body seeking mountains, meaning the same in translation. Here they are. Place your palms on the grasslands, feel the foothills rise with gray pine and blue oak. Here, rest not by the lotus of your old country, but with carpentarias and fiddlenecks of spring. These woodlands may be unfamiliar, their sequoias thicker than bamboo, and the rains unable to assemble monsoons. Still, look out to the distance from where you lie. You will see Mount Whitney is as beautiful as Pupia. The moon is sharp enough to cut your ears, the one from your village. And notice how these budding magnolias gesture like the petals on a duck champa. Is that the jungle flower you plucked when you fled, the one you cradled all the way to St. Paul where you first settled? You cried every time you saw its picture. Grandfather, you are not buried in the green mountains of Laos, but here in the Toll House Hills, earth and heaven to oak gods. Your highlands have come home, and now you finally sleep. Thank you so much for your time and your attention to these poems.
All right, thank you, Mai Der. That was beautiful. I really loved it. I'm seeing in the comments that a lot of people enjoyed it too. Could you tell us a little bit more about your workshop tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was thinking about, one of the things that for me, I've always struggled with as a poet myself. And this was actually something that for me, when I was in my MFA program and trying to write poems, it was always something I was coming up against. And it was this need that I had to sort of want to like explain everything to my reader. Sometimes we feel that, like we feel the need to fully communicate and explain and clarify ourselves and make sure that the reader understands everything we meant in the poem. And when there was one session where I had with my workshop leader, and he said to me, this is Mark Wunderlich, to the poet, he said, you don't have to do that. You don't need to explain everything. It's okay. It's okay to just like, and I think in that moment, I realized I don't have to. You're right. And it wasn't until, I heard someone really encourage me to let the poem be as it is that I was able to kind of let go. And so the workshop tomorrow, that's sort of just a long sort of preface to the workshop, but the workshop is really about how do we create a space within our poems so that the poem can live on its own, but so that we can sort of be still in partnership with it, as the person writing it, but also allowing the poem to exert its own kind of agency, its own kind of autonomy, its own duende spirit, and sometimes, I mean, for me, I'm still learning how to leap in my poems and how to trust the poem. But that's kind of what we'll do. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the idea of the leap and what that even means and how that helps with the process of letting go. And then we'll do like a creative activity. And it's sort of a low stakes creative activity. So you're not going to have to, juggle, or you're not going to have to do a silly dance or anything like that. But it'll be fun. Yeah.
That does sound interesting. I wanted to make a note for people who plan to attend. We have detected a problem that might not be quite solved in the link to your workshop. But if you can go to the newsletter, the link in the newsletter for the workshop works. If you try to go through the website, it doesn't seem to work. And maybe all this will be fixed by tomorrow, but just remember that the newsletter just might be the only way to get in there. And if you, let's see, you could go to our website to see that newsletter, or you can go to Facebook to see it. So in case you didn't get it in your email. That was lovely. And would you like to, we have time, if anyone does, would you like to take some questions?
I'm happy to, if anyone has anything. Yeah.
Hey, I had a question. I've been really interested and like kind of thinking more about this sort of like documentary poetics that you're sort of working in. And I've kind of tried my hand at a little bit of it too. I think there's some interesting history to be explored in like my own community. But I guess what I'm sort of curious about is your approach to the poems, whether you sort of you're just kind of like doing the research and you find something that speaks to you as like, oh, this poem is coming out of this research, or if you kind of think like, I want to write a poem about this part of it, and you do the research after that and kind of like use the research to aid the writing of the poem. Does that make sense? Like I'm just curious about your process.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that it's a very valid question as we begin to see more work around docupoetics, exactly what you're saying. And it's interesting too to see that, you know, more and more poets, and it's not like it's new too, like there have been people who've been doing sort of documentary poetics work for a while now, you know, going as far back as Muriel Rukeyser, you know, and to more recently as well. But that, yeah, it's been exciting to see poetry in engaging with a kind of archival work and research to strengthen what the poems can offer, and to sort of take the poem into this other sort of really powerful space of documentation and of historical reckoning in a way. For me, when I was doing this, it's been a process for sure. It's taken almost a decade for me to get through all of this. So I started this many years ago, back in 2012, when I was finally like kind of just when I was learning about Yellow Rain, and also when there was an incident with a radio show that had a sort of problematic approach to talking about Yellow Rain. All of that sort of inspired me to kind of continue to work on Yellow Rain, even though it was something I had heard about when I was doing my undergraduate studies. But most of it involved, yeah, going through the archives, looking at paper, looking at declassified documents, digging through databases, reading reports, reading in more reports, highlighting things in the reports, finding out if there was something in there that had potential, right? Potential to be part of the story that I was trying to weave about Yellow Rain. And so it takes time, for sure. And for me, because there was so much that I accumulated in the process, I have these really big binders that I, you know, have from the process of doing all this research. I also visited the National Security Archive at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., to then sift through actual boxes of all this paperwork too. So it was a whole sort of research experience for me. And then I got in touch with a professor at Georgetown who had done research on Yellow Rain, and she gave me access to more files. So here I was looking through virtual files, and then here I was also with this archive digging through hard copy files. And so I accumulated a lot of binders out of this. And so just for my own sanity, I had to just focus on the research first. Like I couldn't do it simultaneous, because I would have just gone crazy, because I was also teaching myself everything about Yellow Rain, and I was learning about bees. I was trying to study the biology of bees and really sort of make allow myself to be more informed. And so it made sense that I went years without writing a poem about Yellow Rain until I could feel like I had enough to begin to weave another version of the events. Did I feel comfortable writing some of the poems? I did write a few poems too during that time when I was doing the research, but I was like, this is going to require me to just compartmentalize a little bit here and really focus all my efforts, immerse myself in the language of these documents before I felt like I could begin to craft the skeleton of the collection. So I don't know if that might help. I think there are people who can do it simultaneous, where they're doing the research and then writing the poems, and then doing the research and then writing the poems. But for me, it was like years of research and then years of writing the poems. So I don't know, that might help. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it actually kind of made me think of what you were saying about the leap. It's almost like you need to have like your own trust that you know enough that you can talk about it and people will be able to figure it out. It's like a trust in yourself and a trust in the other person. That's really cool. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Well, I know for me, Yellow Rain is a brand new topic. So I am interested in looking into that further. So thank you so much for exposing me to that bit of history that has been completely unknown to me. And well, I guess we should wrap it up. Remember the workshop tomorrow, Poetry at McLeod, if you're in this area in Charleston. And also take this survey. I just took it myself, and I don't think I spent more than 15 seconds on it. So just do it, get it over with. Nobody wants to take a survey, no one. But please do, it helps us a lot. Oh, Charles wants to. Charles is the only person in the history of
There's nothing to it though. Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
1 minute or less. This is such a lovely way to spend the evening. I just want to say thank you again to the poets and to everyone else.
Thank you, Tamara, for being filling in the last minute, being our pitch hitter there. So, all right. Thank you so much, and it's good seeing everybody. I have sent several of you letters, so you will either have gotten them or will be getting them. So anyway, it's been great, and thanks again. I am going to stop the recording, and that puts a wrap on our second meeting of the calendar year. Thank you for being here.
Good night.